Thank all of you for inviting me to speak this evening, and I want to say hats off to the Burbank ANC for a wonderful dinner. How about a round of applause for all of those who worked on making tonight possible? A fantastic dinner committee. And Sylvia, you are an outstanding chair and a wonderful friend, and it's a delight to be with you and all of your friends and colleagues tonight. And Nane, you're doing a superb job.
Oh, thank you.
I've totally enjoyed it. Isn't she doing a wonderful job? But you made me very jealous tonight because you got to be live and on video. I've never seen that before. That is awesome. Next time I come, I want to be live, on video, and Skype at the same time. Because I've got to one-up what you did, Nane. But that was superb. You're doing a wonderful job, making a lot of fun for all of us. I'm going to be brief this evening for two reasons. First, I ate way too much. And everything was just wonderful. The food was fantastic. Sarkis, as always, everything is outstanding here. Absolutely delicious. So I can't speak long because I need to take a nap. But the other reason is I have yet to hear an elected official give a keynote address where anyone said afterwards, you know, that was a really good speech, but he didn't talk long enough. So I'm going to be brief. But what I wanted to do this evening was just give you a little update on some of the things that we're working on in Congress of general interest and then of more specific interest to the Armenian community. Before I do, though, I want to congratulate Margarita and Sarkis, Talar and Zare on your awards this evening. They're very well deserved. Thank you for all you've done for the community, and congratulations. I also want to acknowledge Elizabeth Chulgin, who was kind enough to come out from DC and does such a marvelous job as one of your most effective advocates in Washington. And thank you so much for being here, and great to see you, and I'm sure I'll see you in a couple of days on the other coast. But through her efforts and all of yours and all the grassroots activism, we've made great progress on issues, and we have yet a lot more work to do. But without an incredible ANC staff in Washington and incredible ANC organizations in the Western region around the country, all that we've accomplished would have been absolutely impossible. So thank you for all of your efforts. Let me touch on a couple general issues that we're working on, and then turn to more specifics. First and foremost, I would say 90% of our focus in Congress is on the economy, and has to be. We just saw today the most recent jobs report showed yet another month of consecutive job growth. That's the good news. The bad news was it's still fairly anemic growth. Not enough to replace the jobs that were lost. And while the unemployment rate dipped slightly, which is good, part of the reason it dipped is that some people have given up looking for work. And so this will remain our focus until the economy is truly back on track. We have several big issues, interrelated issues, that affect the economy that we are going to be grappling with at the end of the year. And just to give you a heads up, don't go near your TV set between the November election and the end of December, because what you're going to watch is going to be quite a brawl, unfortunately, as we work to resolve three big issues. The first is something called the debt ceiling. And you may have seen we had a big fight over the debt ceiling last year. The debt ceiling, basically, the country is like a consumer. We have a credit card, which is the national debt, and when we approach the debt limit, just like when you approach the debt limit on a credit card, with a credit card you have to call the credit card company and say, raise the limit. And they can either raise the limit or they can refuse you. Similarly, in the Congress, we set the debt limit, and when we reach the debt limit, we either have to default on that debt, make radical cuts, or we have to pass a law that increases the debt limit. Now normally in the past, increasing the debt limit was a fairly consensus issue, because The debt limit represents debts that have been accrued in the past, and it represents an obligation to pay those debts and not default. But it has become much more highly controversial and contested. We will reach the debt limit at the end of the year, somewhere between the November election and January 1st. And so we will have to decide, are we going to raise the limit? If we're going to raise the limit, how much are we going to raise the limit? And part of that debate will be over something else that's set to happen at the end of the year. And that is, when we had the discussion over the budget and the deficit and debt earlier, we put in place something that would force, if we couldn't agree to a certain amount of deficit reduction, it would force massive cuts to the defense budget and massive across-the-board cuts to domestic discretionary spending on education, on healthcare, on transportation, on law enforcement, on every other domestic program. So we face this at the end of the year. That will take place if we don't find another way to reduce the deficit. And finally, this is sort of the triumvirate of tough end-of-the-year fiscal issues. In addition to the debt limit and the across-the-board cuts, we have the expiration of what are called the Bush tax cuts, those tax cuts that were passed during the Bush administration. They will, if nothing is done, all go out of effect. So those lower tax rates that went in during the Bush administration will go away. So those three issues are going to take place at the same time. My guess is that they will all be wrapped together. There will be a grand compromise on all three, which will have a lot to like and a lot not to like in it. And probably more not to like than to like, because we are unfortunately in a place, budgetary-wise, where most of our decisions are about what to cut, not what to invest in. But that's what we're going to be wrestling with at the end of the year. And I think one thing that we need to keep paramount in mind when we wrestle with these three great big issues at the end of the year is our goal ought to be creating jobs and growing the economy. That ought to be our central priority. We shouldn't make any decision at the end of the year that doesn't contribute to job growth and getting the economy moving. Reducing the deficit and debt is a very high priority, and part of reducing the deficit and debt will add to the economy because it will demonstrate to the markets and the rest of the world that we're serious about getting our budgetary act together. At the same time, if we go overboard, if we prioritize deficit reduction over job creation, we will contract the economy. And if you look at what's happening in Great Britain right now, they embarked on a real austerity plan, which has a lot of appeal to it. But the result is they are now sliding into a double-dip recession, and we don't want that to happen. So this is what we're going to grapple with, which I know is of great interest to all of you, as it is to people throughout the country. Turning to issues of more specific interest to the Armenian community. Through the good work of the ANC and thousands of volunteers around the country and great professional staff in Washington and all of your hard work, we had success on a very important bill this session. And we strategized at the end of last year about what our approach should be this year. In the past, we have generally relied on one major bill that dealt with the Armenian genocide, and we have put all of our efforts and eggs into one legislative basket. And this year we decided to introduce a dual-track approach where we would introduce the genocide bill, but we'd also introduce a bill that called upon the Republic of Turkey to observe religious freedoms and human rights and to return confiscated properties to the Armenian church that were seized from the Armenian church. And I'm proud to tell you that that legislation passed with an overwhelming bipartisan vote in the House of Representatives. It has now been introduced in the Senate, and we are hoping for a strong bipartisan vote in the Senate as well. So while we continue to press on the Armenian genocide legislation and issue, and gather strength and co-sponsors for that legislation, we have embarked on this two-track approach, which I think has already borne important fruits. There's a third legislative effort I want to mention as well, and that's something that I'm working on and we've almost finished the drafting of. And that deals with the issue of access to justice for genocide victims, many of whom had insurance at the time of the genocide. Many families had life insurance and property insurance, but because they were wiped out in the genocide, they and their heirs never had an opportunity to make a claim on those insurance policies. Well, the state of California, and I was proud to be involved in this when I was a state senator, we passed a law in California that said victims of the genocide that had insurance policies could make a claim on those policies and not be barred by the passage of time, by the statute of limitations. And that passed in California, became the law of the land. Many families brought claims under those insurance policies. But recently, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, in a tragically ill-considered opinion, ruled that this state law that we helped write here in California was preempted by federal law. In other words, where there's a collision between state law and federal law, in many areas, federal law trumps. And the court essentially said that in this area, state law is colliding with federal law preempts the state law, and the victims of the genocide will no longer have access to justice. Now, that was a terrible ruling for many reasons. It was certainly a terrible ruling on the merits and on the policy and on the desire that we have to allow the victims of genocide to have access to justice and to have access to the compensation that they paid for when they bought insurance. But it was also tragic from a legal point of view because it isn't in collision with federal law. There is no federal law against allowing the victims of genocide to receive compensation, or states that want to extend their courts to allow victims to be made whole, or at least make good on the insurance policies they have. So we are in the final stages of completing legislation that would say that it is the policy of the federal government that the victims of genocide or mass atrocity, because remember at the time of the genocide there was no term genocide. These insurance policies didn't require a showing of genocide. They required a showing of loss of life or loss of property. So this law would say that the victims of any genocide or any mass atrocity shouldn't be precluded from access to justice when a state wants to make its courts available for that purpose. And we hope that we can move this legislation which would effectively overturn this very ill-considered Ninth Circuit opinion. So that's another issue we're working on. At the same time, we are very focused on the needs of Armenia and on the needs of Nagorno-Karabakh and the needs of Armenian communities around the world in places like the Republic of Georgia. And as Nane mentioned, Representative Howard Berman and I recently met with the President of Georgia to talk about the needs of the Armenian community in the Republic of Georgia. We've had conversations now with the chair and ranking member of the Appropriations Committee, and we are working on language that we've asked them to include in this year's foreign aid bill that would say that the resources that are devoted to Georgia, there should be a plan to meet the needs of the Armenian community in Georgia, which lives in quite an impoverished part of the Republic. So we're working on that. We are working on language that insists that the resources the Congress allocates to Artsakh actually be spent, because we are in this multi-year fight with the State Department where every year we allocate resources and every year the State Department finds a reason not to spend the resources. And we've given it to meet the humanitarian needs of the people of Karabakh. So we're working on that issue as well. We are also trying to maximize our assistance to Armenia, which is the victim of this crippling blockade by Turkey and Azerbaijan, to make sure that we can provide the kind of economic support and foreign military funding necessary to support that important ally of the United States. So these are the issues that we are working on, and I want to just underscore again how important your efforts are, how important your advocacy is, how important programs like those that Elizabeth will talk about, where young Armenian advocates can come to the Capitol and spend the summer or spend months or weeks roaming the halls of the Capitol, meeting with members of Congress, making their voices heard, learning the legislative process. It's really extraordinarily important. Two final notes, and that is I want to thank you all. Whenever I'm with the Armenian community, I feel like I'm with family. I'm very grateful. very grateful for that. And I am continually in awe of how aware and active and engaged the community is in all of the civic organizations here, but particularly aware of what goes on in Congress. Whenever I'm anywhere in my district, invariably it will be an Armenian family that will stop me in the street or in a restaurant or a store and say thank you for what you're doing. And I'm always astounded that those that stop me even know who I am. In Los Angeles, members of Congress are among the most anonymous members of Congress anywhere in the country. And why is that? Well, the reason is we are in the Los Angeles media market. A lot of my colleagues that come from more rural states, whenever they're in town, they're on the top of the news on TV. Well, for me to be on the top of the news on TV, I would need to kill someone. And even that would not be enough. I would have to kill a celebrity, engage in a high-speed chase in my car, and with helicopters tailing me, whatever. That's what it takes in Los Angeles. But I'll tell you, I am not anonymous in the Armenian community. And I thank you for that. I know you probably heard me tell this joke before, but I loved it when I was on one of my visits to Armenia and walking down the street with Rafi Manoukian, and people in Armenia are stopping us in the street. It's like, Rafi, how are you? And Congressman Schiff. And I'm like, Rafi, wow, we have an international reputation. And Rafi says, don't let it go to your head. These are our Glendale constituents. And of course, he was right. It was Glendalians visiting Armenia. But thank you for making me a member of the family. And finally, I want to say thank you to one of our honorees, Margarita, who I understand is retiring from the city of Burbank after many years of extraordinary service. You've done just a magnificent job, and we will miss you, but we know you won't go far away, and thank you for your wonderful service. Thank you all for inviting me tonight. It's a pleasure.